To give our first Start Making Sense lightning talk tonight, we have Miranda Gottlieb from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and a brand new board member at SSDP. So I want to talk a little bit about policy theory. You academics, ooh, don't worry, it's not that tough. So I want to think about, just for a second, what is the drug policy movement? What is it? Any ideas?
Us.
Any others?
To change drug policy.
To change drug policy. I want to think about not what we're doing or why we're doing it. You got another answer, sorry if you won't. But what is it at its most fundamental level? Freedom. I think it's the public policy process. An intervention in the public policy process. Most basic. Yeah. Okay, freedom's pretty basic and existential. Sorry, you beat me. But it's an intervention in the public policy process, or at least in theory, that's what it would be. We have identified a problem, prohibition of drugs, and we're proposing solutions, namely ending the prohibition of those drugs. We seek positive outcomes, right? Not like ending prohibition in this way or that way, but positive outcomes that aren't punitive. And to do that, we need action and adoption of policies to get there. We have to have community-centered implementation to get those policies adopted and implemented to receive the positive outcomes. Public policy process, that circle I was talking about. But we have a lot of uncertainty, unfortunately, and we know this because past policies have failed, and past policies have devolved into things that we don't want them to. Let's name some examples. Abortion policy, same-sex marriage still has problems in certain states where people are battling against it. We're seeing policies that should be simple, but they then change into something that's maybe not so simple or not so uniform as we potentially had hoped. So I was thinking about what kinds of policies I thought would be the easiest to adopt anywhere. And I was like, oh, well, seatbelt policies. And then I thought about it, I was like, wait, only seatbelt policies make sense to my generation because I've always worn a seatbelt because of my community, my parents. So it wasn't even as simple as I had hoped. Because before 1948, seatbelts didn't even exist. So there's people on this earth who lived without seatbelts, which is crazy. But seatbelt policy is kind of interesting because it wasn't compulsory in states until New York did it in 1984. But it took 11 years, and still not even all 50 states have seatbelt laws. So there was a problem, people dying in accident-related deaths. So the solution was, okay, make access to seatbelts possible, and also make them be used. But it took 11 years, and now these are the citation ranges that we see for non-seatbelt compliance. But there's so many more nuances. Who has to wear a seatbelt, when they have to use a seatbelt, how you can be in violation of the seatbelt, the law enforcement. There's like a zillion different nuances for seatbelts that I thought were completely universal. Turns out not. But there's a positive evaluation. The outcomes are really incredible. In states that have good seatbelt policy, very few people die compared to when they didn't have seatbelt policy. Harm reduction, right? But my point is that it took 11 years, and we still don't even have, that was 11 years for 49 states. New Hampshire, I don't know what's going on, but they don't have like really good seatbelt policies. So there's still fragmentation of something that's really simple. And so in thinking about drug policy, implementation is so complex, like more so than ever before, because the stakeholders change every single day. Because we're moving drug policy into spaces that it's never been before, or that people didn't think that they were empowered to be part of. Students, children, I mean, businesses are now taking ownership of the drug policy reform movement from new communities that were previously excluded and incarcerated, right? But it just keeps growing every day. It's like a pond that keeps rippling. So the implementation is getting harder. But the fragmentation is actually getting larger. Because now where we have good access to certain drug policies, say syringe exchange, which has significantly decreased HIV and hepatitis C transmission, we don't have it in my state. of these transmissions. Is this better or is it worse? That we don't have syringe exchange in my state, so it's actually worse, these transmission of diseases, than it was, I don't know, 10 or 20 years ago. Sometimes our implementation is going awry. So we see fragmentation most easily in marijuana policy, right, where you can get relatively affordable access to marijuana in certain states and much more expensive in others. So what do we do as drug policy reformers to ensure that this public policy process is actually providing good outcomes, positive outcomes, rather than just moving into something that's even more fragmented? Sorry, I don't have an answer. But we also have this view that we want community-based strategies. But how do we have community-based strategies that don't have extreme amounts of fragmentation that leads some people paying $160 for the same violation as someone else in another state that pays $10, talking about seatbelts? Is it fair? But we want our communities to be involved because it makes sense, right? Your community is different than my community. I want you to have as much say in what works best for you. But is it justice if someone in your community pays $160 to do the same thing that I only pay $10 to do wrong or not use my seatbelt? I don't know. But if we're reaching for better outcomes, my call to action is we have to set the threshold for what we want and not be complacent nor apathetic to the kinds of policy implementations that our adversaries want. We're putting forth the policies, but that part is over because we are part of this public policy process, and it's not about taking it back. It's about setting the foundation of saying this is what we expect, and this is what we will not be complacent with. Because in Ohio, reformers rallied against policies for marijuana that were unfair and unjust moving forward. And in thinking about a post-prohibition world, I believe that we have to set the stage for the kinds of implementation we want long-term, and the onus is on us, not the policy implementation, the bureaucracy that implements the policies. We set the standards right now together and leverage our community assets to make those as just as possible. Because we can no longer let our adversaries, let our anti and our pro-prohibition friends say, we're going to be more punitive, and we're going to say we're going to be more just. So I say let's take back implementation and ensure that we are the most just rather than the most punitive. Thank you.